to be in any particular position to demonstrate leadership. Because we know that there are people in this organization who are not in positions that we could call leadership positions, but they demonstrate significant leadership because they're influencing their space. It's called leadership from inside the pack. I don't have to be the captain to demonstrate leadership on the team. There's some way in which I can influence the team in a particular direction. The second piece of this, of course, is the notion of influencing. And that requires a full range of tools. Moving from, of course, the whole issue of fear to recognition, to reward, to threat, to intimidation. I mean, there's a whole host of things that I could use to influence people. And I need to know that. But we influence consciously and unconsciously. There are people who are looking at you who you're not even conscious of, and you're influencing them. We don't always know the impact that we have on people. Sometimes as we age, somebody will meet us one day and say, I remember when I came to work in so-and-so place, you used to work there, and I used to look at you and I always said X, Y, Z. There are ways in which unconsciously we influence other people, but we have to be conscious that that is happening. And influencing by what? Well, some people influence by their having. I like to tell people when I was growing up, I had the bat and the ball. So I influenced the rules of the game. I influenced who was the captain and who was not the captain. I was the captain. When you're out the captain, the rules changed. Because for the captain to be ready out, you must out him twice. And if that didn't, and that was, I was only able to exert that influence. Why? Because there was something I had. People who have resources, friends in high places, status, experience. When you have things, there's a way that you can influence. You have a good network, whatever it is, there are things that we have and we use that to influence. But we also influence by our doing. Track record, results, what we've delivered. That person is really good, great track record, solid person, they deliver. That brings with it some ability to influence the space in which we are. Some people influence by their knowing. If you want to know something about that, ask so-and-so. So we want to know something about energy. And guess what? The whole room was there listening to you and saying, yeah. Okay, why? Because there's a knowing that comes from you that the rest of us are not privileged to have. All right? And then, of course, along with the having, doing, and the knowing, we are also able to influence by our being, who we are, our character, our aura, what we stand for, just who we are as people. I don't have to deliver any results. I don't have to have any big set of resources, but just who I am can bring a certain level of influence to the space that I'm in. And when we begin to talk leadership, we really have to ask ourselves, do we have a good mix of influencing by our having, our doing, our knowing, and our being? So whom do we influence? And we influence, the targets of influence ourselves, others, and organizations. I made the point a while ago that there are others, the seen and the unseen. People are looking at us. Some of the people looking at us are bandits. Some of us are people who just looking and admiring who and what we are. But people are looking. They know where you work. They know what you do. They hear what you say. And very often that is something that we are not aware of. We also, though, influence organizations. Yes, we influence within this organization, but we belong to families. We belong to groups of friends, friendship networks, people who worship together, people who play together, people who hang out and line together. So formal or informal, we belong to many organizational networks, and we have the opportunity, and dare I say the responsibility, to influence those groups in some kind of way. We don't have to be the captains and the heads and the presidents of everything, but just being in that space allows us the opportunity to influence. And of course, where do we influence? What are the action areas? The action areas are growth and change. If there's leadership taking place, if you're leading and no growing and changing is taking place, I'm really not sure what you're leading and where you're going. If we're leading in today's world, something must be growing. Your organization, you, the people, something must be changing. But as we grow and change, Hopefully we're moving towards fulfilling some kind of vision and purpose. Some big picture, some promised land is there somewhere. But between then and now, there's the issue of achieving results. As we like to say in Trinidad, while the grass growing, the horse starving. We cannot wait for 2020. Well, so, if I hear anything about this in Trinidad, you'll hear something. But the fact is, when we have a vision, while we have this big picture and the Millennium Development Goals, and why long before we get there, are we making progress? Is something happening along the way? Yes, you want to leave to go and have a good time at the river or wherever you're going, but long before you get there and have the real experience, there must be a sense that we're making progress along the way. And leadership requires that we engage in that growth and change, that we have the big picture and move towards it, but that we deliver on some things as we go along the way. So in a change environment, what are the things that really come at us as leaders? Change leadership really requires us to play multiple roles, multiple functions, and have multiple postures. Sometimes we have to be the catalyzer, the person who really stimulates the thing and gets things going. Sometimes we have to be the process helper. Hey, this is how we ought to do this thing. Maybe we just have to be the expert and be the solution giver. Here's what? This is the answer. There are times when that's appropriate. But even as things change and we stimulate things and catalyze things to move, there are also times when we have to pull it back together and say, okay, hold on. Let's not go too fast. Let's not let everything fall apart. How do we handle this thing and stabilize things? And sometimes it's not about you at all, but really saying, listen, I don't know anything about this, but there's a chap who works in so-and-so organization. Call him. Or there's a place where you could access this information. Go to this site. And so we have sometimes as leaders to be resource linkers. And while we're doing all this, we have our work to do still, you know. All right, so understand that it really is a challenge, so that there are multiple activities. It's about managing yourself and managing other people. It's about managing the old work and also managing the new work. Because it is about what this new thing is going to be, the new processes and so on. And it's managing this whole process towards transformation. So it is not an easy time. Leading during change and being a leader during a time of change really is about more work, and I don't know anything about the rest of it. You know, the pay part of it. That's not my. That one is above my pay grade. But I could tell you, it's more work and more different kinds of work and work that will challenge us. So how do we do this thing that we call leading in a complex environment? Well, let's understand a couple things about change, some fundamentals. The pervasiveness of duality. Nothing exists without its opposite. There's no in without out. There's no up without down. There's no light without darkness. Creation begins with disruption. So that in a change scenario, there will be positives and negatives. There will be losses and gains. There'll be exits and entrances. There'll be endings. There'll be beginnings. Things cannot stay the way they have been, and that happens all the time with everything as we go in. That's the way the universe is constructed. That's how creation is, and it comes at us in our face just because of the rapidity and the complexity with which things are happening. Another key issue, of course, is the uniqueness of people. In all of this, is people. People come with their different behavioral styles and their personalities and their attitudes, their perspectives, their history, and their circumstances. And when you ask people, what do you bring to this organization and to this team? They love to talk about strengths and competencies and experience and so on. Nobody puts their hand on and says, well, I bring in some real baggage in here. But we all do. We bring our baggage, we bring our memories, we bring our biases, we bring our prejudices, we bring our little irritation points with us. All of that comes with us when we come into the organization. And during a time of change, all of that begins to pop up to the surface. Because during cool and easy times, we mask those things very nicely. But as the pressure builds, those little unsavory aspects of who and what we are do pop to the surface. So, what is our challenge in terms of leadership? First of all, we have to promote transformation. We have to be about the business of I don't want to say selling, but let me say selling. It's really about promoting. The notion of transformation requires that we have to transform. We have to get out there and sing the song and wave the flag for transformation, because to stay where we are is not going to get us anywhere. It is change or die. And what are some of the issues in promoting transformation? The fact is, we'll be going to a new and different place. None of us have ever been to 2011. So we don't really know what we're talking about. It is as vague for us as it is for the people who we're leading there. Moses had a little insight into the promised land, but even Moses didn't get there. The fact is that there's this thing out there. The picture may be vague, unclear, and scary for some people. It might be exciting for some. But the truth of the matter is that this thing is somewhere out there. It's new, it's different. We haven't lived there before. And this ICT space that we're creating, this society that we're creating in the region and we're seeking to get people into, is a place that we could talk about, think about, but it is not something that we know for sure with our hands on it. The appeal and the validity of the vision. Is it really that way? What about the credibility of the messenger? What about us as we promote transformation to this new reality? What is our credibility? That's an issue in transformation. Who is selling this thing? Who is out there promoting it? Who's championing the cause? Who's waving the flag? Who's beating the drum? And of course, in it, the very real issue, particularly in our circumstance, of collaboration and partnerships. What are some of the conflicting interests? What are some of the common interests and the connecting points that really can get us together so that we can put our resources and get there? How do we live with this thing that we call co-opetition? Where sometimes we're going to cooperate, but there are times when we are going to compete. And how do we live with that kind of ambiguity? Maybe we should talk with people in the banking sector. Banks have mastered that splendidly. They know when to cooperate with interest rates and everything, and they sit down and they talk and they agree. And then they come out, so the cooperation takes place, and then they come out and they go into competition mode. But there's a place where they all agree. How do we find that common place among ourselves, across programs, between programs, across jurisdictions? How do we get that conversation going? So, what are some of the approaches that we can take in terms of it? We need to be able to develop a defensible rationale for moving. With any of our programs, and ICT in particular, what really is the rationale for doing this thing? Is there a vision? And Jennifer would have described this morning what the strategy was. But to do that, if I want people to go with me, how do I build trust and commonality? You know, we challenge ourselves in the work that we do in our organization on this issue of trust. And I'm convinced that you cannot build trust. Trust is a side effect. Trust is a consequence of other things that you do. And let me just explain by example. Your child is 18 years old, has just got their driver's permit. Daddy, I can get a car. Now, you have brought up your child well. You've trained them in the way of the Lord and so on. They're respectful and they went and they did their driving lessons and you know they have the permit. So you say, okay, and you lend them the keys. At that point, do you trust your child? When you do this, taking a huge risk. Well, let me put it this way. Your size of risk is about this, and your trust is somewhere down here. So the child goes, and 2 hours later, they come back. You look outside, you check the car. Car is okay. Then you check the child, and you see they're both okay. That's the order in which you do it, right? And you say, okay, fine. At that point, what happens? Your risk comes down a little and your trust goes up a little. And every time about the same thing happens. So you have this decreasing sense of risk and an increasing sense of trust. It is not that you're learning to trust the child, you know. It is that somewhere between the risk and the trust, there has been a positive outcome. Because if there was a negative outcome, it would reverse very quickly. So the key is not so much how do we get to trust people, but how do we, when we collaborate, how do we put things in place so that we have positive outcomes from the collaboration and some of the risking that people do. And that is what needs to take us into this area of building trust and some of that commonality. We have to look as well for the benefits to all stakeholders. It's not just about you and your program and your people and where you're coming from. What is in it for a whole lot of people in here? And in the business that we're in, there are politicians, there are business people, there are, ICT service providers, you have the regulatory agencies, and you have other